My name is John Avery, but everybody around here just calls me Johnny. I'm 73 years old now, and I live out on Maple Hollow Road, a narrow lane that sort of curves itself into the small town of Cedar Springs, Alabama. I worked most of my life as an auto mechanic and a small-time garage owner, grease under my nails and the smell of oil like a second skin. These days, I live off a pension, the odd yard job for neighbors, and the slow cadence of mornings with a cup of coffee on the porch. I say all that because I want you to know where I stand when I tell you this. What I saw on that little camera changed the ground under my feet. For a long time, my house was a place of ordinary things. I had a marriage that lasted 40 years, a little girl who grew up in the yard chasing lightning bugs, a workshop with a sagging roof that held half my life. Today, I keep my grandson Noah 2 days a week, and I like that because it keeps me moving, keeps the memories from becoming too heavy. The decision that led to everything started small and seemed sensible at the time. My doctor, Dr. Patel, told me to get more rest, and I decided to take a short weekend away to see my sister Helen in the next county, just to clear my head. I told my daughter Sarah I would be gone for 2 nights, but what I did not tell her was that I had been noticing things at home that made my stomach tighten. It was a tiny omission, a lie by omission maybe, and in the end, it was the wedge I needed to pry open the whole hidden room of our lives. If you are watching this and you like what you hear, do me a favor. Hit that like and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It warms a man like me to know somebody across town or across the country is listening. I grew up not far from here in a house with a sagging porch and a wood stove that made every winter smell like soot and molasses. My mama, Margaret, taught me to listen twice before I spoke. That lesson kept me out of trouble more times than I can count, but it did not prepare me for the quiet of a child's bedroom at 2 in the morning, or for the way a little empty piggy bank can look like betrayal. When I was a boy, things were simple, in the way they usually are for small towns. I learned how to work with my hands under the wing of a man named Earl Granger, who ran the only garage in town before I ever owned one. Earl had a laugh that shook his whole chest and hands as big as hams that could feel a problem in a block of metal before he even touched it. He taught me to take pride in doing a job right. He also taught me to stand by people, even when it was easier to turn away. I think of Earl a lot when things got hard later. My schooling stopped after high school because my family needed me to bring a paycheck home, but learning on the job shaped me. The scent of oil and rubber and hot metal wrapped around those years, and I still dream of a radio station playing somewhere in the background while I worked on a car, the tinny voice of some DJ talking about the weather and ball games. My wife Margaret was the bright center of our house. We married young and raised Sarah with all the awkward, fumbling love of 2 people trying to do right by a child. Margaret loved afternoon tea, humming hymns and making biscuits so fluffy the plates had to be balanced. She kept the garden and tended to the neighbors like extended family. When she passed, the world lightened in color, but got heavier in weight. We had days of laughter after that too, of course, but the edges of things narrowed. I worked, Sarah grew up, she married and divorced, moved back and forth until finally settling in a small apartment above a laundromat. She is resilient in ways that make me proud. She also has a temper that lights quickly and a way of shutting down when fearful, traits she might have inherited from both of us. There came a stretch in my life when a garage was doing well enough that I could pay for small things, a new tractor tire, a heater for the church basement, a class ring for a nephew. I watched Sarah go to college for a little while and then come back home in a hurry with a suitcase of books and an ache I could not reach. When Noah was born, my heart found a new rhythm. His laugh sounded like a bell inside the house. I would wake before dawn because my joints ached, make coffee, and sit in the kitchen watching the light spill through the curtains while Noah breathed softly in his crib. The routine of our days became a comfort. The clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug, the neighbor Lucy bringing over a pie, Pastor Jim dropping by on Sundays with a paper in his coat pocket. Those weeks before anything went wrong were full of small, ordinary treasures. So when little things began to slip like loose threads, I noticed. Sarah started coming home later than she used to. She would knock softly at the back door as if she were afraid to wake me, say she had been out with friends, but the way her eyes flicked away when I asked the name of these friends made me uneasy. Noah would sometimes wake up crying. Once, I found a coin, or about his piggy bank feeling lighter. One side, I found a folded receipt tucked under a cereal box that had the name of a motel down on Route 6. Another time, I smelled a cigarette behind the washing machine, an odor that did not belong in a house where Margaret had always banned smoking inside. These details were small on their own, like the way the floorboards creak in winter, but they braided together into a pattern my gut could not ignore. I started following small clues the way Earl might trace a sound in an engine. I talked to Mrs. Lucy across the street who brought lemon cookies every Thursday. "I saw Sarah pull out about midnight the other night," she said, voice low, eyes worrying like a mother hen. "She had a small bag, and she was kind of nervous, like she was waiting on someone." I asked Noah in the gentle way you ask a child about nothing at all, and he held up 2 fingers and said, "Mommy takes my money for the big man." I remember the way his lips thinned and how his thumb found the loop of his blanket. That image lodged like a splinter. I bought a cheap little camera online. It was smaller than a deck of cards and had a night vision that made everything look ghostly green. Putting it in Noah's room felt like stepping over a line. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself I needed to know the truth before I did something that would split the family for good. The camera clicked to life the first night I installed it in the lamplight by the bookshelf. The plastic was cold in my hand, and I could hear the house settling, the pipes whispering. I remember the tactile clank of the battery snapping into place and the faint scent of dust and lavender from the laundry basket. I learned that the weight of secrecy has a sound, too, a quiet like someone holding their breath. The footage showed Sarah enter the room at 2:15 in the morning, the glow from her phone painting her face in pale blue. She moved with a practiced silence like a cat. She opened Noah's drawer and took out a ceramic piggy bank wrapped in a dish towel. She held it against her chest and whispered, "I am so sorry, baby. Please forgive me." And the sound was as small as the rustle of paper. She carried the piggy bank out to her car and drove away. The camera recorded this 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, there was another passenger on her lap in the car. A man's voice, low and urgent, could be heard as she handed him a small roll of coins and a paper towel. He said, "You promised tonight." Sarah's voice betrayed a kind of rawness I had not expected. "I know," she said. "I know. I am trying." When I watched those images, I felt every old fault line open up. Betrayal is a funny word when it hits you in a small town. It comes with neighbors, opinions, and a past you share. I could have called the police then and shown them the footage, but the camera had done something else to me too. It had humanized what I feared. For all the wrong, in her hands she cradled a piggy bank that once held the first dollar Noah ever got. I remembered Noah's breath in the crib and the way his small fist had gripped Margaret's wedding ring the day she died. I called my sister Helen and told her I needed to talk. Her voice over the line was the kind that could iron out wrinkles. "You do what you think is right, Johnny," she said, "but you also do it with your heart." The next morning, I met Sarah in the diner, where the coffee tastes like ink and the jukebox hums under your feet. The place smelled of bacon fat, lemon oil, and the tinny note of a country song. She slid into the booth opposite me like an apology. There was grease on her fingers, and her eyes were rimmed red. "Dad," she said, "I can explain." We talked, and the dialogue between us stretched and folded in ways that made each line raw. I asked how many times, and she answered. I pushed, and she pushed back. The waitress, Maria, filled our cups and left, giving me a look that said we were both old enough to know better.
Our conversation had the cadence of two people trying to rebuild a bridge with their hands. "Why did you do it, Sarah?" I asked, tapping my spoon against a saucer. "Noah needs that money for school, for camp, for things he deserves." "I know," she said, voice small. "I am so stupid, Dad. Tony and we got behind. He promised he would pay me back. I thought I could get him out. I thought I could fix everything before you noticed. I did not want to look at you and have you see me failing." "Tony?" I said. "Who is Tony?" She hesitated, then told me. "Tony Green. He used to play pool behind Ray's place. He is quick with a smile, but he has a pocket that eats money. He said he would be different, that he would invest in a little side thing. And I believed him, because I wanted to believe him. I took the coins, Dad. I took the insurance money you left for Noah once. I took from the bank I made for him. I am sorry." There were more exchanges after that, 8 or 10 in the span of an hour, where each of us said something true and painful. I remember the way my fingers felt numb against the rim of my cup, and how the
sun came in at an angle through the diner window and drew a line across the table like a guide beam. Sarah told me about overdue notices, a letter from a landlord, nights she stayed up worrying. She told me about a ring of men who promised quick returns and took quick smiles. I told her about the piggy bank, about Noah asking if his money was gone. She said she had kept a small part back to buy him new things when she could. The smell of coffee grew thick between us, and for a while I could not breathe through it. I confronted Tony later that day, not in the diner, but in the parking lot behind Ray's bar, where the asphalt still held a little warmth from the sun. The confrontation was public enough to keep tempers in check and private enough that people did not crowd. He was younger than me, wiry, and smelled faintly of motor oil and cheap cologne. "You paid her to take it?" I asked, voice low. He shrugged like he owed the world nothing. "We all do what we gotta do," he said. There was an exchange of words, outwardly short but inwardly jagged. He called Sarah naive, and I said that betrayal had the shape of his grin. There were 5 people who watched that scene unfold. Ray stepped outside, and Helen called the police because she could not stand the idea of things sliding into worse. In that moment, my choices looked like a map with only hard roads. I could press charges for stealing. I could demand the money back in a court that speaks in slow formalities. Or I could try something more dangerous, try to fix the living bone of my family by bringing the hurt into the open and asking for help. I did both, in a way. Tony got a warning. I filed a report. But I also took Sarah to Dr. Patel and to a counselor named Maria King who ran a group for people with compulsive behaviors. I helped her into a stabilization program with terms that included working nights at the bakery and attending meetings at the church. I sat in those meetings with her, not as a judge, but as a witness, which was sometimes the hardest thing. What followed were months that felt like frost and thaw in turns. Noah was kept with Helen for a while because he needed a steady hand as the family figured itself. The town had things to say. There were nods and whispers at the post office and a jar of sympathy money on Lucy's porch with a note that said, "For what you need." The church called a meeting, and Pastor Jim said a prayer that made my chest ache and loosen. Officer Ramirez, who had known us since I fixed his truck, came by and said, "John, we see a lot of things around here. Sometimes the best help looks like a family pulling together and not tearing each other apart." That was the kind of sentence that made me feel small and brave all at once. There were several moments of tension I remember, like scenes cut and played slowly. One was the night I found Sarah in the living room with a paper towel full of coins, counting them on the coffee table. She was trembling and looking at a picture of Noah at Christmas, a grin on his face and marshmallows in the cocoa. She said, "I thought if I took just a little, no one would notice." I sat down and said nothing for a long time. Then I said, "We taught you to build with your hands, not to hide from what you break." It was 2 paragraphs of talk where she told me about the gnawing worry, and I told her about trust.
and in the pause between sentences, we both moved toward the idea of rebuilding. Another moment was when Noah, after a long day being shuffled between houses, asked me simply, "Did Mommy take my coins?" I knelt and looked at him, smelled the bubble gum on his breath, and said, "She made a mistake, and we will fix it. You are not at fault." His small face, that way it scrunched when he was trying to understand the size of adult truth, is something I will carry with me forever. Those 2 paragraphs of conversation were tidal in their effect. They forced me to choose the line between punishment and repair. The hardest part was accepting that forgiveness is not forgetting. I could not pretend nothing happened, nor could I let the event define every waking day. We did the paperwork, set up a restitution plan with receipts and signatures. Sarah worked nights and attended classes at the community center on budgeting and parenting. I cleaned out the garage and started taking on small restoration projects to keep my hands honest. The town watched, and people either reached out or looked away. The gossip tells its own story, but the facts were that Sarah checked into a program, Tony moved away, and Noah went back to sleeping in his own bed, though for a long while his hand sought the empty spot on the shelf where his piggy bank used to sit. 1 month later, I remember the smell of rain on hot pavement, and the way Noah hugged me so tight on a Tuesday morning that my ribs ached in a different, good way. 3 months on, Sarah had been sober long enough to hold a job, and had come to one of the small group meetings at the church, where she read a letter aloud about shame and taking steps. The congregation clapped in that way small towns do, like a soft tide. 6 months later, we planted a small tree in the backyard, a maple sapling that Lucy brought and said, "For new things, John." I dug the hole with my hands, felt the cool dirt slide between my fingers, and thought of Earl and Margaret and all the folks who had taught me to keep faith with a thing even when it bent. The epilogue to this whole long, bruising chapter came in 3 marker moments. 1 month after the camera, I had stopped sleeping with the television on and started going to the senior center to play checkers. The people there asked questions in that kind, slow way older folks do. I told them a little and listened to a lot. I started making neat columns of coins on my workbench to show Noah that money could be counted and returned and that promises could be kept. This moment was about small repairs that had the resonance of great acts because they were persistent. I taught Noah to change a tire, and he taught me to be patient, waiting while he practiced spelling on the kitchen table. The scent of old motor oil mixed with the sweetness of his popsicle sticks became, in those days, the smell of mending. 3 months, Sarah had a sponsor named Maria who called to check in and left messages that sounded like a new kind of melody. Sarah had found work at a bakery, the one that made the good cinnamon rolls, and baked at dawn. Her hands, once quick to hide, now rose flowery and honest into the air and held dough like a new kind of prayer. We had counseling together. There were sessions where words were hard, and the counselor, Dr. King, would ask simple questions like, "What does trust look like to you now?" And we would fumble for answers. Past the judgment I felt then, I found myself learning patience the way a man learns to slow a metal lathe. Noah began to sleep through the night more often. The neighbors started to include Sarah again in small ways, offering a casserole, a ride, a nod. 6 months later, the tree we planted had pushed a slender branch into the air, and I had learned to sit with the ache of what had been and the subtle hope of what could become. Sarah had repaid the first of her restitution sums, and we had a small ceremony in the kitchen where Noah placed his new piggy bank on the shelf. We did not pretend there were no stains, no marks, but we worked on stitches. The community had opinions, but also hands that helped. Helen moved in for a while to help out and cook the kind of stews that make a house smell like home. Pastor Jim preached a sermon about bearing burdens together that made many of the older folks nod along and push their hats back. If there is a lesson I will hand to anyone who listens, it is this: the brittle thinness of trust breaks with small things as well as large. It cracks like old paint. But repair is not a
time fix. It is 100 small acts of showing up, of admitting fault, of making restitution, of letting the vulnerable tell their truth and teaching the young ones that mistakes can be repaired. Even as a man who once believed a straight back and hard hands would answer everything, I learned that true strength is in the softness of asking for help. If this story has moved you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and share a short line beginning with "I felt," so others know they are not alone. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and join a small community that listens. I will leave you with this. I have scars from decades of work and from a few nights where trust was torn. But those scars remind me that I can still mend, still stand, and still teach a small boy how to change a tire and to save his pennies.